Hey guys, what's going on? I hope you're doing well today. This is going to be the last commentary video that I do for a very long time. This video is going to accompany the changes in 2026 video, which is slightly outdated now as time has kind of, progressed and things aren't really quite the same. So let's go ahead and get into it. We're going to go ahead and cover the game first, its process, of course. And then we're going to go from there with my views on various things. So, what a lot of people don't really know is that every now and then I get games from people. I would go to cons and stuff, and I would have people that would sometimes want to give me things during meetups, and so I've had a lot of games given to me over time. I've had a couple of Mario Karts, I've had Resident Evil, both of the light gun games they made, Umbrella Chronicles and Darkside Chronicles. I had somebody mail me a copy of Nightmare Creatures 2. And so what I try to do is I try to film these games. I'm not always good at it, but I do try to do it. So with Umbrella Chronicles, it was very easy in and out. It didn't really have too many issues. I wasn't really struggling with it any. With Darkside Chronicles, there was a lot of caveats with it. Whenever I go and I start filming it, I like to use the original media that it was presented to me on. What typically winds up happening is I'll be gifted the game, I'll bring it home, and I'll run it through I'll run it through an emulator sometimes, especially if it's PS1. But for GameCube and the Wii and everything else, what I have a tendency to do is, since I am running it on original hardware via USB loader GX, I have a tendency to copy it to my system, and during that copying process it has a tendency to copy all of the disk's defects as well. So I think for Darkside Chronicles it had presented a bunch of challenges to me, and I wasn't really ready for any of it, I think. The game is slightly upscaled. I knew that I wanted to go and do that first and foremost. I wanted it to look a little bit cleaner. So it is being fed through a RetroTank 5X. And that took care of a lot of the scanline issues that I was having, things like that. I was really, really happy with the end result. The one thing that I couldn't really get around, though, was going and, for lack of a better term, working around a damaged disc. The guy that went ahead and gave me the game was super sweet about it and stuff. He was there with his mom, and I guess I wouldn't really so much be calling him a guy. I mean, he was like a 15-year-old kid, but, he came up and, he gave me this game, and, he asked me if I could film it, and I agreed to it, and I wasn't really expecting to have this many issues with the disc. So the disc, when I was copying it, it initially didn't want to copy. I said, that's weird, so I'd go back and I would double check, and I flipped the disc over, and the disc has a pretty good amount of damage to it. So I went about going and trying to fill in the scratches on the disc the best I could. With these games being, coming up on 20 years old, it's not exactly, easy to find a copy that isn't totally beat up, and so I suspect that the disc had quite a storied journey throughout its life. So I eventually had gotten it to a point where I could go and get the copy carried over, but I found out later while I was going and trying to do runs and trying to film the game that some segments of the game had to be skipped over entirely. I wouldn't really consider this a complete run in many ways, because on one end I had a cutscene that I had to go and skip because it would literally lock up on that cutscene. It was only, I think, around 7 seconds missing out of the total cut. But on the other end, when I had reached the end of the game, there's a bunch of bonus content that you unlock that you can go and play, like extra missions and everything else, and so I initially wanted to do those as well. This cut was supposed to be a lot longer than what it is. It's supposed to be about, I want to say 7 hours, but it clocks in at a little over 5, because when I had gotten to the end of the game and it would unlock those missions, I would go back through the main menu and I would try to select them, and then everything would just crash. You know, try doing it straight off the disk, and everything would just crash as well. So I sat down and I was presented with a little bit of a dilemma. I could have either gone to the internet, procured a copy, because I already, you know, have a copy in my possession. You know, so I should be able to go and grab an image of it. Or, you know, I could just simply not film it. I didn't really like either prospect, I think. I wanted to film it because, you know, this young man was nice enough to go and bring it out and say, hey, you know, can you go and, you know, can you do a run of this? I'd really love it if you did a run of this. And, you know, like, I feel like, you know, you're kind of obligated at that point to go and, you know, say, hey, yeah, you know, you're cool enough to bring this out here. We can totally go ahead and do this. But on the other end, it's like, okay, well, you know, is it really the same if you don't use the disc that they gave you? So I thought about it for a really long time, and the standing rule was, okay, if I go and somebody gives me a game, you know, I want to use the original media that they gifted me with. I don't want to go and say, oh, you know, this person gave me this game, let's go ahead and find an image of it, you know, because it's too damaged to use. I think it kind of defeats the purpose a little bit, you know, so I omitted a short cutscene and pretty much all of the bonus content as well. You know, the bonus content doesn't really add too much to the story in my opinion, so I just did a main run, and that was pretty much it. I also wanted to go and do a bunch of changes with the filming style. This was the first game that I had filmed on OBS. And so I sat down and I said, you know, I can't really use the game capture, you know, HD software anymore. It's just really not that great. It's corrupting my recordings. It's not very stable. There's just too many things wrong with it. And so when I had picked up the new laptop, I had decided that I was going to move over to OBS. And so OBS was fairly simple to just like pick up and set up, and you know, it had very little issues with my capture card, and there was nothing that I couldn't tweak and tune away. And I was pretty grateful for that, I think. The new laptop handled it like a champ. You know, I think throughout the entire 5-hour process that I was going and filming this, the fans ramped up maybe once or twice. You know, like it just wasn't, you know, it wasn't really making any noise, wasn't overheating. It really wasn't doing anything that I would have expected it to do. It handled it with a lot of grace, and, you know, I was pretty happy with that. You know, I felt like I'd made the right choice at that point, and, you know, I felt like it wasn't really getting any better. And OBS was actually very rock solid, especially during the setup process. It flat out asked me, you know, what do you want to do? Are you streaming or are you just recording? And it's like, well, I'm just recording. And then the setup process and the walkthrough of it was very, very straightforward. You know, it's come a long way in all the years that it's been out. Because I remember when setting up OBS used to be a very complicated process, and I didn't really care for that too much. You know, so I was kind of cringing a little bit going into it, you know, just saying to myself, oh, this is, you know, this is kind of awful. But I was pretty excited to start something new. I wanted to leave behind the game capture HD software because it was just really unstable, and I learned very, very quickly that my capture card was actually fine. It was the software and the hardware of the other laptop that was messing up pretty badly. So now that I actually have a laptop with a fair bit of weight to throw around, you know, I'm not struggling to record things anymore, which is really, really nice. And then it also handled the being fed through the upscaler very, very well on top of it in terms of the interlacing and everything else. So I was really, really content with that. I think going into Darkside Chronicles, I wanted a different approach to it. I would look at what everybody else was doing, and I wasn't really ever satisfied with it. They would play it on an emulator using a controller, and you can tell because a lot of the movement is very jerky and the image is a lot more clean than it has any real right to be. So when I went in, I said, okay, I'm going to do this on original hardware. I'm going to go and give it a little bit of upscaling, you know, a little bit of noise reduction as well. You know, like I wanted to clean it up a little bit to where it didn't look totally busted out, but I wanted to leave it unmodified enough to get the original effect. So I was kind of balancing between the two, I think, and I was constantly asking myself, okay, how much is enough, more or less, like how much should I go ahead and upscale it? And then with me dealing with file size limitations still, I didn't want to go straight 1080p and stuff, and plus 1080p was leading to a little bit of artifacting as well, and I wasn't really sure how to clean it up because I'm still learning about it and stuff. So that was the method that I wanted to use for filming. In terms of approach, I wanted to go ahead and do something completely different with it. I wanted to sit down and I wanted to take the House of the Dead approach. With me, light gun games don't really have very much of an ability to go and, well, they don't really cope very well as survival horror games. With me being raised throughout the 80s and 90s, light gun games were just, constantly shooting, reloading, shooting, reloading, shooting, reloading. It was more of a bullet storm power fantasy, if you would. And so that's how I typically remember them as. Even when the Silent Hill light gun game came out and it tried to be, hardcore survival horror with, you timing your shots and stuff, it never really felt quite right. Survival horror and light gun games in general don't really mix as well as they should, because the nature of light gun games is to just shoot and reload and just tear everything up and, dodge enemy fire, especially if you're playing something like Time Crisis. So I was looking at what everybody else was doing, and, I would see the whole fake terror thing, and then, I'd see them just go and try to milk it as much as they could. And I didn't really like it too much. I would just kind of sit down, look at it, kind of go, and then walk away from it a little bit. Like I understand that they're trying to make it believable and stuff, but it wasn't really what I wanted to do. So I wanted to take a completely different approach. I wanted to treat it as what most light gun games are, as a straight power fantasy, more or less. So I had already beaten this game. I'd already maxed it out and stuff, and I wanted to go through, I wanted to enjoy myself, and I wanted to treat it less as a game and more as a non-stop ride. And so I was like, okay, what can we do? Well, we have, infinite ammo and no reloading, and I kind of looked at it and I said to myself, you know what, that's really not that bad. That could really smoothen things out, and, that could be really cool. I think that'd actually be really, really enjoyable. Because I'd already done, at this point, light gun games that, were kind of survival horror-esque, like what I did with Dead Space and stuff. And I just kind of said, it's alright, but it's not something I would go and do again, per se. And so, with Darkside Chronicles, I decided to kick on Bottomless Mag, infinite ammo, and that was pretty much it. I didn't want to unlock all guns immediately. I didn't want to go and have all of the power maxed out immediately. I just kind of wanted to have the bare essentials to keep things kind of moving along. I didn't want to do any sort of, fake I'm struggling crap. I wanted to kind of keep it as simple as I could, with everything being as authentic as possible. And that was pretty much it. I wanted people to come in as well and to be able to enjoy themselves, Instead of trying to milk the whole survival horror aspect of it, I wanted it to be a little bit more like an action game of sorts, keeping with the themes of what a light gun game typically is, just kind of non-stop action for the entire duration that you're going and playing the game for. So it was a lot of shotguns and SMGs, and over the course of the entire run, I literally didn't have any sort of issue going and just kind of ripping through it and having a good time with it. There was a lot of debate when I had started filming it as to whether or not I wanted to go and do it in a single sitting, or if I wanted to try to break it up and then stitch it together on the loading screens, as I've had to do with a couple of the longer games that I've filmed, like Alan Wake. And so I was literally going and filming this, on a Friday evening. And I just it was a spur of the moment thing. I'd been practicing it a little bit, and I'd said to myself, if I start now, will I be done by 2 a.m.? I sat down and I seriously pondered it. I said to myself, is this doable? You know, I think that maybe I can do it. So let's go ahead and let's see if we can actually do it. I went ahead, I got the laptop set up, you know, the entire setup was all nice and ready to go, and I had, I forgot to double check a couple of things. And so I went ahead and I had done quite a few mistakes during this run, and I thought it was actually rather comical. So the first mistake that I had done was forgetting that a lot of your system files from your other saves have a tendency to overlap. And so I had unlocked infinite ammo on one save, and so it wound up bleeding into another save because the system read it and said, oh, okay, you know, you have this, so you can use it on all your other saves because it's saved to the system. And I said, alright, that's cool, you know, and so I was kind of laughing a little bit, you know, and it was rather just kind of a comical thing because the system, the way that it has a tendency to read the inputs, was kind of goofy as well. When I had started, like, first playing it, it was a lot of, how are you going to play the game? Are you going to go, and are you going to start off with just the nunchuck? Or are you just going to do the Wiimote? You know, so it was a little bit strange. I opted for the Wii Zapper, of course, because, like, gun game. And there was one point that I went to go check my chuck, and I had to disconnect it from the Wiimote, like during gameplay. And I did not know that the game will actually swap around your control config on the fly to accompany that. You know, like, they literally go, they measure how you're playing the game, and they say, oh, we're going to give you this control scheme now. But the thing is they will say it once, and only once, and if you're not paying attention, it will leave you rather confused. So I sat down and I said, oh, okay, alright. And I started doing this run, and I didn't realize at the time that I did not have the proper control config at all. So normally, for all of the context-sensitive stuff, it doesn't use A. When you use it in Zapper config, it's mainly B and Z. And so the entire time I'm going, and I'm getting these context-sensitive actions, it's like press A. Well, out of instinct, A is normally remapped to Z, right? So I'm sitting here and I'm pressing Z and I'm still getting hit anyways. And I'm just sitting here saying to myself, what the hell is going on here? You know, like, why is this an issue? And so I just kind of sat down, and for the entire run, there are complete segments where you just see me bear pawing, you know, the A button, because I realized that it was defaulting back to the A button, and I didn't really understand why, because I had missed that first memo, I guess, you know, and so I spent the majority of my run just being dazed and confused, and it was actually quite silly. You know, so this run, I guess, could be easily summarized as just confused Rambo, you know, just confused Rambo run, and, you know, my controls were kind of backwards, and, you know, even opening up the menu sometimes on accident when trying to go and heal myself because it had moved a couple of the buttons around. And so I was just kind of, once I had figured it out, I was kind of laughing a little bit, but I figured it out when I was on a loading screen and it was leading up into a cutscene. And I was like, okay, let's look up the controls because I'm pretty sure I remember it as this, this, and this. And that's when I had found out that, you know, hey, if you go and you unplug the nunchuck, it will default back to this controller config. And I'm just kind of sitting down, I look back at it now and I kind of laugh a little bit. And I shouldn't be laughing at it, I guess. Like, a lot of people kind of sit back and they're like, well, that's a mistake you made, but I do find it rather funny. And it was something that I think that I'm always going to laugh at because I don't really take this super seriously. You know, so the entire time that I was going and filming this, I was like, you know, let's just go ahead and have a straight Rambo moment. Let's have a lot of, you know, SMG firing, a lot of shotgun firing, and let's just make it just loud and messy. And, you know, like, I wanted to have fun with it. I didn't want to have to focus super hard on it. Like, I remember with Umbrella Chronicles, I was struggling with it rather hard because I was like, okay, well, I actually have to aim really, really well because I don't have the luxury of infinite ammo or anything like that. And so when Darkside Chronicles had rolled around, I'd actually, when I had started using cheats, I did it because I wanted to just be comfortable while playing the game. I didn't want to struggle super hard. I didn't want my aim to always have to be on point because even though I have a larger screen, I still struggle really, really hard with a lot of the reticles. I do not enjoy the Wii reticle at all, with me being largely red blind. I can't see them correctly. So it looks like I have a circle with entire chunks cut out of it. On the screen it's very difficult to see, and then given the nature of the Wii, I can't just say, oh, okay, I'm going to get up closer to the screen, because with the Wii you have a minimum distance that you have to be away from it. If you're too close to it, the sensor bar simply just does not register it. The Bluetooth will register the buttons and everything else, but it won't register the actual reticle because you need a sweeping range to have. So, I kind of sat back and I said to myself, okay, do I want to endlessly practice this game? Or do I want to get cheap and cheesy with it? And do I want to sit down and just enjoy it as much as I can? And so I thought about it for a while, and I said, you know what, enjoyment's key. Let's just kind of turn it into a rip-roaring ride with just mess and gore, and just, let's have fun with it. Let's treat it more like House of the Dead instead of, like a survival horror game. And so I actually really, really enjoyed it, I think. And the only thing that I didn't really care for the entire time was the realization that I had halfway through that I should have done it on PS3. I do have a PS3 that's laying around, but filming on it is really, really kind of rough. Like, the Wii port of this game literally is plagued with frame rate issues, and like the visuals aren't anything special, it's what you could expect out of a Wii, but the frame dips were getting kind of ridiculous in some areas, and while the game is still perfectly playable and stuff and very enjoyable, I feel like when I experience an excess of frame rate issues when going and filming a game, it kind of takes away from the overall experience, because I always have felt that it should be a lot smoother than that. And so I just kind of sat down after a while and said, okay, well, this is just kind of how this game is, and it just kind of struggled to run on pretty much on pretty much any piece of hardware that you put it on. Even when you go and emulate it, you still continue to have issues. With the PS3, it still has frame rate issues. They're just not as bad. I think that Umbrella Chronicles was the much better experience in that regard. But there was other issues that I think had plagued the experience a fair bit as well. Sometimes I would go and do the context-sensitive stuff correctly. It wouldn't register correctly at all. Sometimes if I was trying to do an on-screen action, like, for example, shooting the top of that church in the first chapter, it wouldn't even register correctly. It was really, really weird, and I spent a good amount of time trying to troubleshoot it, to see if it was hardware-based or game-based. And after going through a bunch of Wiimotes and trying it on a whole different Wii, I came to the conclusion that it was just game-based. So there are some segments where, you're going and you're mashing the buttons to do the context-sensitive action, or you're trying to get the game to actually go and progress, and you're realizing very, very quickly that, it's not really panning out too well. So this led me to believe that either it was just a glitchy experience with the game, or it was from damage being done to the disc. I was never really able to go and figure it out. Like, I was tempted to go and look up footage from other people, but, I felt like I'd kind of be undercutting myself a little bit, because I notice when I watch other people's gameplay, it has a tendency to go and influence my own. So I was a little bit weirded out by it. I just kind of kept pushing through with it, and I was like, okay, well, I guess that this is just how it is, and yada yada yada, and I just kind of went from there a fair bit. And
did you hear that?
But overall, I can't really say that the experience was bad. I was able to do it all, well, as much as I could in a single take. You know, I didn't really experience any crashing, you know, I didn't have to redo the take a ton of times like I have with other games and stuff. You know, I just kind of sat down and said, oh, okay, well, one and done, short and sweet, you know. When I had wrapped up, it was like, man, it was like 1:57 in the morning. I just said to myself, holy crap, I'm exhausted. You know, like, I set it up to render, and I was like, we're going to go ahead and cut off the edges, you know, and then go ahead and render it. And depending on how it turns out, we may do a color-corrected version as well, because since it's on the Wii, the visuals are kind of washed because the Wii was essentially just an overclocked GameCube. And so I just kind of, I thought about it for a while, you know, and it was just really one of those things. And I had thought about ways to enhance the frame rate as well. There was like a whole list of cheats that you could use to literally go and give the frame rate like a hell of a boost and stuff, and you know, go from there. But the problem is it guts the visuals a little bit too much. So it's like, okay, well, you know, how bland do I want to make the game to achieve a usable frame rate? Ultimately, I just made the choice to go and accept the frame rate for what it is, you know. And then with me having Turbo Fire on, the Wii also struggles to produce that many effects. So there was that as well. I just kind of sat down and I was like, it's going to be one of these things, you know. And but if I had to go back and do it again, I would probably most likely do it on PS3, you know, just for the better performance. I mean, performance on the PS3 isn't spotless, but it's a lot better than what the Wii was doing. The Wii, I think, however, was, in terms of controls, it was a much better experience. You know, like, I've had an opportunity to go and, like, play both. It's just the Wii, it just does it better with the, it just does it better with the nunchuck and the Wiimote, I think. So around the time that I was going and filming this, I was realizing a lot of things in a very short time span. I was just kind of saying to myself, oh, okay, let's go ahead and try to sort our lives out, you know. So while I was filming this, I was basically trying to fix everything. I had left a bunch of groups that I was in, and I didn't really want it anymore. I was kind of sitting down saying to myself, oh, okay, well, you know, let's just go ahead and try to clean up as much as we can. I was realizing that things were falling apart a fair bit, and I was also realizing how incredibly dissatisfied I am with YouTube. So commenters are a fact of life. There really isn't anything that, you know, you can go and do about it when it comes to what people say on the internet, maybe block them or report them. But when it comes to commenters, I think I try to handle everybody with a little bit of grace. I try to get to comments in a timely fashion as well. It's not always easy, but, you know, I do try to go and respond back to people within like 2 or 3 days minimum, you know, especially if it's something that they're wondering to me about. And I'm just kind of one of those people that I try to be engaged as much as I can with it. I'm not always good at it, but I do try to do it. And so oh man, I'd have to say over the last 2 years, I have noticed that YouTube in general has tried as hard as they can to literally strip away any form of agency that you have as a content creator. Like me personally, I have a tendency to try to curate my own audience. You know, like I'm very much so aware of the kind of people that I would like to attract to the channel. And so I feel like you kind of have to cultivate your own audience to a certain lesser extent, you know, like you have to put out what you want to get back essentially. So with every run, every commentary video, you know, I try to say, you know, always be good to yourselves and each other. I try to extend a certain level of kindness that I typically don't see anymore. And so it's something that I have been doing for, whoa man, like a decade now, where I'll try to cultivate, you know, the environment around me a fair bit, and for the most part it works. you know, you have a tendency to attract the people that you're looking for. But with YouTube, I found that it was really, really weird. They have an auto moderation system in place now where they will flat out say, oh, we don't like this comment, we're going to go ahead and hide it for you. And the thing is I don't really need anything like that. I know it sounds kind of weird, but I honestly just don't want or need anything like that. I think that I'm more than capable of going and having the ability to look at a comment per se and judge whether or not, you know, it's fit for use on a channel that I run. And so my time on YouTube, it's been good and bad. On one end, I have the relentless censorship that their algorithm provides now. But on the other end, you know, I also have people that leave super cool comments that get censored anyways. Like, it never really made much sense to me. So I always try to be chill to everybody that's on here, I think. I do get people that come in every now and then, and they decide that they want to show their asses on the internet any way that they can. I've had people that pop in and they're like, well, we don't think you're disabled, and it's like, yeah, okay, whatever. I've had other people that pop in and they'll be straight hateful about it. You know, it's not uncommon to see transphobia, you know, in the comments section. And so I have a tendency to just delete the comment because that is not what I want to cultivate here. And then I just kind of move on. I don't really think about it too much. I know a lot of people have a tendency to go and say, well, you know, you're attacking their freedom of speech, but I've never really viewed hate speech as free speech. You know, not to me at least. I've never really been able to accept any form of hate speech because at the end of the day I realized that hate speech can never be free speech because it frequently comes at the expense of whoever the hell it's attacking. So it's never free in that regard. And so I would get comments that were rude to me all the time, and I never really cared too much. I would just be like, hey, I'm sorry you felt that way, you know, just go ahead and get rid of the comment, move on with life. But I think what had really started to bother me the most was when people would go and attack each other in my comments. I would get up, and then I would literally like have a quiet morning, and I would just show up and say, okay, you know, let's go ahead and log into YouTube and see if there's anybody that I need to reply to, you know, things like that. And so I would go throughout this entire process, and I would notice that people would attack each other in my comments, and that would have a tendency to actually make me quite angry because I always felt that this was a place where you could like sit down and just enjoy yourself and not have to worry about too much. And I would always have people leaving homophobic comments and transphobic comments geared towards other users in my comments section. I didn't really care for that too much because, in all honesty, people seriously deserve better than that. You know, they deserve better than, you know, showing up and getting insulted and things like that. So I had noticed that the algorithm past a certain point was literally going and removing comments that were harmless while not removing comments that were harmful to the community at large. So I was always wrestling with that a fair bit. And this had led me to eventually disable comments on all of my commentary videos because people were being disrespectful for the sake of being disrespectful. And then the algorithm was also censoring the hell out of people that were being actually quite pleasant to be around. So it never really made much sense to me, I think. And I always thought that it was kind of strange how I know that a lot of these people, if they were confronted in real life, you know, they would not be saying this crap. But I kind of forget sometimes that given the nature of the internet, people are way more bold because the fact of the matter is that they're hiding behind a screen. You know, they hide behind a screen quite often, and that's just kind of how that is. You know, like when you go ahead and you hide behind a screen, it gives you a certain level of anonymity, and so you feel way more bold about things, you know. And since on the internet there doesn't really seem to be a very large amount of repercussion, you know, people get dumber way quicker. And I think after a while I had just kind of grown tired of it. I wasn't so much tired of people taking shots at me. I'm not really super bothered by it. I just kind of remove and move on. But I think when people start attacking each other and they don't even really know each other online and stuff, and they attack each other over some of like the dumbest crap, I do get annoyed with that. I can understand somebody being attacked and then they go and they defend themselves. That's fine. But I never really understood what a person gains by going and attacking somebody that they're never going to see, that, you know what I mean? Like people they don't know, you know, they just attack them for the sake of attacking them. You know, they show their ass for the sake of showing their ass. And so I had grown kind of disillusioned with it past a certain point. You know, you would go and you would remove comments for being disrespectful to either yourself or somebody else in the comment section, and they would always be very quick to reach into their pocket and scream, I've got, you know, freedom of speech, and forgetting that I'm not a government entity. You know, they don't have any, they don't really have any freedom when it comes to that, you know, because I'm not the government. I can't do anything for you. So I think that past a certain point, YouTube had started to feel like poison. I would log in, there would be some form of negativity in the comments section, and I would actually get pretty bored with it after a while. You know, it would just be something that I would just sit there and that I would stare at, and then I would just say to myself, you know, people honestly deserve better than this. So after a while I had made it a point to just turn off comments because I didn't really want to deal with it. You know, if people couldn't be the bare minimum and just be decent human beings, then they simply wouldn't have a voice here. But the problem is with comment filtering not really working correctly on YouTube, it felt like there was really no end to it. You know, that there wasn't going to be any sort of peaceful resolution that I was ever going to be able to reach for. So I was actually kind of disappointed with it for a while. You know, like I would just kind of sit down and look at how people treat each other and say, yeah, I really don't want that. And, you know, I would go and I would get like truly amazing people in the comment section, but the problem is that they'd be attacked by other people, and I just didn't really care for that. We would have other people that would come in and they would go and they would complain about how, you know, I don't like this and I don't like that, and like they would go and they would honestly think that their complaint would go somewhere, and it wouldn't. They would typically just be hidden from the channel. You know, like I understand that not everybody's going to like everything, but I've always kind of wondered how low you have to be to literally go and complain about just the dumbest stuff. You know. And so we're going to go ahead and segue into the section about going and doing this mess with a disability, as well as going and dealing with generalized toxicity. So I, believe it or not, have never really been much of a fan of any of my commentary videos. I know it sounds weird. It's like, you know, Raym, you're making them. I guess, I know, I am making them. But I think when it came to commentary videos, I would do them simply because people would come in and continuously say, hey, I enjoy these, you know, can we go ahead and, you know, would you mind going and, you know, keep doing it? And so I was never really much of a fan of any of my commentary vids. I don't really like to hear my own voice, per se. You know, like I've never really been much of a fan of it, but I do the commentary vids because I know that I have a very small demographic of people that actually go and enjoy them. You know, so I would constantly say, you know, hey, let's go ahead and, you know, make these vids and go from there. And so I would just kind of sit down and I would keep making them, and people would just kind of come in and complain about it a little bit. And it was just always really, really weird to me, I think, you know, because they have all this stuff that they can be doing, right? Like they have all this stuff that they can go and be doing, you know, they could have a hobby, they could literally just have all this stuff that they can go and do, and yet they choose to complain on the internet. And I always thought that it was actually kind of strange because I can understand complaining if it was something dire, right? Like if it was something that was just really just horrible, but I never really understood the point of complaining for the sake of complaining. And so when I was diagnosed, my doctor was actually really chill about it. You know, he was like, hey, we're going to go ahead and have to start you on meds, but until these meds actually sink in and start doing the work, you're going to have problems with speech, you're going to have problems with this, with that. Like, he gave me a whole rundown of things that, you know, I should be expecting, which, jokes on him, I was already experiencing a lot of it. So I had already started to treat it as the norm. And then, you know, as a content creator, I think that it was just one of those things where when you go and you look at it, you know, you understand, I think, from a content creation standpoint, that you want to go and you want to enjoy yourself. You know that you want to make the content, and you want to have a good time with it. But at the same time, you're kind of like, okay, well, I have these limitations. I have, you know, these issues that I'm going to be going and struggling with a fair bit. So it would probably be better to go and, you know, do the best that I can and go from there. And so, you know, you're fully aware at that point that you're, you know, working with what essentially would be a full-blown disability. So I knew that with my commentary videos, I knew that I was going to have speech issues and everything else. I knew that I was going to go and just struggle with it pretty badly, but I had decided, I think, really early on that I wanted to do it anyways, you know. So I sat down and I kind of, you know, buckled up a little bit, and I said, okay, we're going to go ahead and do this anyways, and I know that I'm going to have issues, and that's okay. I was fairly accepting of myself to a really large degree because at least I had some sort of explanation as to, you know, why I have speech issues and stuff, and why my words are kind of swapped around and everything else, and why I go on tangents, and, you know, why my brain loops around sometimes. And I remember there'd be like so many people that would come in and they would just go and they would complain about it. Like, I had one guy, I guess, that he thought he was something special, and he popped up and he's like, okay, we get it, you don't like this, and like, he had literally taken a ton of time out of his day to orate his displeasure about me having cognitive issues while my immune system was just kind of munching on everything. And I remember like reading this comment and saying to myself, okay, this guy literally could have done all sorts of stuff. You know, he literally could have done, you know, all sorts of stuff today. He could have gotten a hobby. He could have watched a TV show. You know, there's literally just so much stuff that he literally could have done today, but he chose to waste time essentially and complain here. And so it was really weird because a lot of these videos that I make, they take a lot of time to produce. They're not perfect by any means. They're never going to be perfect, but given the limitations that I'm working within, I was actually very content with it, per se. I was happy with the end result because there's a lot of people out there, I think, that they will go and they'll say, I have this disability or I have this illness, but they'll let it hinder them, you know, as much as they can, more or less. And so nobody really wanted to reach up to the challenge, you know, for much of anything. And so when I had started this, it's because I wanted to go and reach up and embrace that challenge. I knew that I wasn't going to be 100% with it all the time, but I still wanted to try to do it. Because you never really know how good you are at something until you actually go and try to do it. And so that's how ABGL actually got started.
Don't be afraid.
And so I just kind of sat down for a while and said to myself, yeah, this person's seriously complaining about this. And it was just really odd to me, I think, because when you go and you're like, okay, you know, I have this disability essentially, and I'm going and I'm making the choice to go and do content creation anyways. You know, I think it's rather amazing because a lot of people, they kind of adopt this defeatist mindset, and I've never really been much of a fan of it. You know, I'm not really so much worried about I'm not so much worried about it being flawless. I'm more worried about, I think, doing the best that I can do in the capacity that I'm able to do it in. and going from there. And I think that's what a lot of ABGL is about. I've never really been content, I think, with a lot of my commentary videos. It isn't so much the tone of my voice, you know, with me being autistic and stuff, I've always been relatively monotone. It's nothing special by any means. I think it was mainly how my speech just goes to hell sometimes. I mean, now I can look back and say, oh, well, I have this condition which causes this, and you know it's explained and stuff, and so you feel a little bit better about it. But I think going back and looking at, you know, a lot of the commentary vids and even quite a few of the mailbags, all of the brain fog that I was going and suffering through really, really hard was like really evident, and so I get a little bit embarrassed about it. You know, I kind of look at it a little bit and I say to myself that really could have been better. But I also ask myself the question, well, how good could it have ever been? And I do think about that a fair bit. You know, I go and I look at it and I kind of say to myself, oh, okay, you know, this is just kind of how it is, I guess. And I just kind of have always looked at my commentary vids and said, God, man, I wish this was different. You know, I really just wish that it was different for me. You know, that way it could be a lot more smooth than what it is. You know, I kind of wanted to have that experience per se. I don't mind putting in the work and stuff. You know, I don't really mind any of the other stuff that, you know, comes with it or anything like that. But I think when I was just going and looking at it, I was just kind of saying to myself, you know, this could have been better. You know, like this could have been a lot better, I think. And so yeah, there is a certain level of disappointment that's there, and you just kind of, I think you kind of grimace a little bit. You know, so I kind of made the choice a while back to literally go and just kind of discontinue commentary while I go and, you know, pursue other things.
I'm pretty sure she's still around here somewhere.
Let's go then.
Overall, I think that the YouTubing experience has, it's been okay. It hasn't been the best, it hasn't been the worst. It's just kind of there, I guess, you know, and I've been needing a break from it for a very long time. I've needed to get my health in order. I've needed to just figure things out, but I've always just been kind of constantly pushing it and saying to myself, oh, okay, well, we're doing X, Y, and Z and, you know, all this other stuff. And, you know, when you go and you have that much stuff kind of stacked on your plate, it makes it hard to do much of anything. Like, I think that my health was becoming more and more evident because as you go through the entire recording of this game, you literally go and you can see me squeezing random shots because a lot of the nerves in my shoulder were so heavily compressed that it would cause my fingers to jerk. And so every now and then you would just kind of go and see me squeezing a round out. And the sad part is it's like not even intentional, it just randomly happens. And so I think at that point I said I really need to take a break from YouTube because I need to get my health in order. I need to have more surgeries to try to fix all this compression and all these other issues that I'm having. So, you know, we need to kind of use our brains a little bit more, you know. And so I was realizing a lot of things at the time. I was realizing I was going to have to contend with my health. I was realizing that I would have to go and get my life in order just in general. I was realizing a lot that I was just needing to go and clean house, essentially. You know, I had a lot of things that I wanted to do, and then I was also trying to figure out what I wanted to do with the channel, essentially. So I just kind of sat down and I said, okay, well, how do we go about doing this? And so I had started wrapping up. I started chasing my mental health more. I had started chasing my physical health more. I started engaging in fitness more aggressively, you know, because I realized that things had needed to change. And, you know, if I wanted to go and have that change, I was going to need to bring it in myself. It wasn't just going to randomly happen. It's something that I had to literally go and push for, more or less.
Wait.
And so I had made it a point to literally go, and I wanted to continue YouTube, but I wanted to also chase my health. I wanted to get my life in order. I needed to take care of both my folks. You know, I needed to take care of my, fiance. I needed to just take care of so many people. And when you literally go and you have that many people that you need to go and take care of, it actually makes it incredibly difficult to have time for rendering and filming and just everything else. You know, it's not something that you're able to easily do. You know, so you just kind of sit down and you say, okay, I'm going to be struggling with this and everything else, and it just really wasn't that great. I think I was having additional issues with the channel in general because I knew that I was going to need a new content batch, but I wasn't really quite sure.
What about you?
I wasn't really quite sure how I was going to go about figuring out what content batch that I wanted to do. I kind of said to myself, well, I could do Sega games. That sounds pretty cool. And then I just kind of said to myself, I don't know, that would take a lot of practice because Sega games have a tendency to be very aggressive, right? So I just kind of sat down and said to myself, oh, okay, well, we could do Sega games later. And then I was also thinking about going and filming all the Silent Hill titles, and then I just kind of said to myself, that franchise is actually kind of personal to me. It's not something that I want to go and, start filming anytime soon, per se. It's just, Silent Hill is a completely different monster, for me. It's not like Resident Evil where I could just toss it out there. The more that I had thought about it, the more I'd realized, I really just don't have any sort of, with everything being super chaotic and stuff, I just don't really have any sort of plans for the channel. I can't figure out what games I want to play. I've already been doing this, 5 years, and I've already put a ton of games out there. I'm relatively proud of that. I've done almost the entire Resident Evil franchise. That's great. There was just a lot to it, I think, that, there's a lot to it, I think, that I would sit down and I would go and I would look at it and I would just kind of say to myself, oh, I just have no idea what it is I'm doing. And so the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I really couldn't carry on like this, and I would have to address my life at some point. I knew that I needed better medical care. There was just a laundry list of stuff that I wanted to chase, and there was a lot of people that I needed to take care of. And so as time went on, I just kind of said, yeah, I'm not really going to be able to do this very much longer, and if I do, it's going to be an extremely poor quality. And I thought about it, and when that realization hits, you just kind of sit down, I think, and you say to yourself, this really could, in all honesty, be better. But this is what you're contending with, and so, as life goes on, you more or less have to formulate around it, and when there's not a lot of time, you can't really do much of anything. You can't just sit there and say, well, I'm going to do this today, because you look at the list of stuff you have to do, right? And you say, okay, well, I've got to do this, and this, and this, and I've also got to do this. And, we also have this that we have to go and look at, and, the more that you look at it and stuff, the more you realize, oh, hey, I just don't really have, a ton of time to go and do these things. And then there was also additional things that I wanted to learn as well. I wanted to take time out to learn DaVinci Resolve and everything else. I wanted to up my skill set, but sometimes life has a tendency to get in the way. So I was making, what it had boiled down to was I was making advancements in one area, but I was completely and utterly floundering in other areas. For example, with OBS, I had figured out how to use it and how to film on it, and then we had also upgraded the laptop and everything else, and so that was done. Like, we were advancing in that regard, but I wanted to take time out to go and learn DaVinci Resolve because I had already invested in the software because it is quite good. But I was still struggling to understand a lot of the facets of it. So there was a point in time where I said to myself, I really need to just kind of sit down and I need to take time for myself. And then with all of the challenges that has come with living in America the last while, I knew that things were going to be an uphill battle with that as well. I kind of sat down and I said to myself, yeah, this could be better. You know, it could definitely be better. I have no idea, why the hell it's like this. And so I was just kind of, in many ways, disappointed with a lot of things. I wasn't disappointed with taking care of people. That's just like a fact of life and stuff, whatever happens, happens. But I was more disappointed that I wasn't moving as fast as I wanted to move, And I was also disappointed that I was falling behind on my goals. So that's when I had kind of made the passive choice to discontinue commentary videos, discontinue content in general for now, and just kind of go and chase life. I know on the docket of stuff to do that I want to go and, bare minimum, I want to learn how to go and use DaVinci Resolve in its entirety. I want to get my health in order, both physical and mental. I've got 2 folks that I've got to take care of, because they're not only getting older, one of them has cancer. I've got a fiance that I want to take care of, like I've got all these things that I want to do, and the problem is there's only 24 hours in the day, and with each video taking about, 2 or 3 days to make if I'm at it nonstop, there just really isn't any time for me to go and do that. And, I still enjoy content creation and stuff. I mean, I'm a little disillusioned with some aspects of it, especially with like how people choose to behave and stuff. But I do want to continue doing it. I just don't really have any time to do so. And that's kind of one of the main issues, And I'm just kind of like sitting here, and with me not even sure what series that I want to tackle next, that's also another problem. Because I'm noticing that I'm like starting to get in the habit of like filming entire franchises and stuff, so I'm just kind of sitting down and saying, oh, okay, well, we're going to go ahead and, we're going to go ahead and do this, and getting to where I need to be. So I think for now, going forward, the changes in 2026 video, all of that is still valid, except it's not going to be staggering out a video into a, I guess, schedule of sorts of one every 2 weeks. It's going to be content being discontinued in its entirety. I've got to take care of my physical health. I've got to get the inflammation under control. I'm actually receiving a lot of my meds really, really well, but I'm still within that first 5-month timeline. So we're not even sure what the full effect is yet. And so I do want to go and get to a point where I can sit down and say, okay, this is done, this is fine. I don't really have any issues with, X, Y, Z, all that mess, really. I just want to get to a better state of well-being. I think I'd also prefer to be way less stressed doing it, because when I'm stressed, the quality is very, very poor. And with everything going on in my country right now, I just don't really see that stress diminishing anytime soon. And with me having a ton of people to take care of, I really just don't see that aspect of my stress disappearing either. So it's been a long time coming, I think. I've played a lot of games on this channel, I've got to meet a bunch of really, really cool people. I've enjoyed my time here. I don't really have much to complain about. It's just life is getting in the way. And sometimes you actually have to go and step away to actually go and tackle life, so you can sit down and say, oh, okay, this is, where we're at, essentially. The sooner that you can actually go and do that, the sooner you can bounce back and everything else. I'm happy with all the content that I've produced here. I have no plans for any future content whatsoever, because I simply just don't know what I want to do yet. I don't know if I want to chase Sega games or if I'd like to do Metal Gear Solid. That's a series I've been wanting to film for a very long time, huge fan. I've also wanted to film Silent Hill, but on the other side of things, you know, Silent Hill is just kind of a personal franchise to me. Like, Silent Hill means more to me than Resident Evil. And so it's been a lot of things for like a really long time now, and I've just been kind of sitting down and, you know, with everything being super chaotic, it's very difficult, I think, to do any form of content creation. I've enjoyed my time here. You know, I don't really have any complaints or anything like that. I just don't really know where the road would take me from here. So I've wrapped up all the games that people have given me, short of Nightmare Creatures 2, because that game is so buggy that I literally could not progress whatsoever. And, you know, by the time you guys are seeing this, you know, it's going to be quite a few months down the road. You know, I'm going to be missing for a hot minute while I go and handle life and just take care of myself and get everything to where it needs to be. So for everybody that's actually taken time to come out and enjoy this completely atrocious gameplay that I've been delivering for years on end now, I greatly appreciate you. I appreciate the time and the effort and the energy that you guys bring in on a pretty regular basis, and hopefully, eventually, at some point, I can go ahead and resume content creation when I can get a wrangle on my life. But until then, I wanted to thank you guys for coming out, and as always, please always remember to be good to yourselves and each other. Take care.
Or we'll never make it out of